participating. We're having great transition. It's just a testament to who he is, that he wanted to go ahead and get started in this work, even though he's not contractually required to do so yet. So I know he is also doing a lot of meetings today and transition work, but I think he will be in the meeting. Leslie, is he? I can't see the participants. If he's in, I would like for him to say a few words.
Yes, he's on the call.
Dr. Glass, would you like to say a few words to the Parent Advisory Council?
Hi, Kevin. Thank you. Yes, I have made it in spirit and in physical form here to Kentucky. It's been a exciting transition. There's so many things that we're working on right now that are challenging, but also important at the same time. And I was on another meeting this morning and described the experience as drinking from a fire hose. I did grow up in the state, but there's a whole lot to learn about Kentucky and the challenges that we face right now. But you got a great team at the Kentucky Department of Education that is doing their best to bring me along. And so I look forward to working with all of you and hearing from you on your perspectives on how we meet those challenges and what are the right things that we can do to support schools and teachers and students all across the state. So I'll turn things back over to you, Kevin. I'll be on and listening in and happy to jump in if I'm needed throughout the meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Glass. And I know I'm excited for everyone in the education community in the state to get to meet Dr. Glass. And he and I are going to have to drop off the call around 12:30, assuming we go that long. So we may not be able to provide closing comments. There's a meeting that we must attend. And so I just wanted to give you all a heads up about that. Leslie, I'll turn it over to you. I think we have a pretty hefty agenda, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay, great. I want to remind everyone that you are being recorded. This meeting is being recorded, and by joining, you're giving consent for this meeting to be recorded. I'm going to go through the roll call, and if you can let me know that you're here, that would be great. Katie Bentley.
I'm here.
Great. Laura Beard is here for Laura Beard representing Brooke Gill.
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Carol Cecil.
I'm here.
Sherry DeMar. Okay. Judith Bradley.
I'm here.
Kathy Smiley.
I'm here.
Carrie Kazar. Kristen Brown. LaMonique Mason. Lauren Mitchell.
I'm here.
Rhonda Logsden.
I'm here. Hope y'all are doing good.
Lisa Myman.
Yes, I'm here.
Mary Ann Jennings is here for Melissa Goins.
I'm here.
Rachel Noyes.
I'm here.
Mandy Sapp.
I'm here.
Sarah Ruth. Stacy Strotman. Tom Haggard. David Wiesenhorn.
I'm here.
Cindy Wren. Okay, great. If you all will take a few minutes to review our June minutes so that we can make a motion and get those approved today. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion. Mandy Sapp.
Thank you, Mandy. Do I have a second?
I'll second. This is Lisa Myman.
Great. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Those opposed? Great. Thank you. Motion approved. Our next speaker is going to be Matthew Ross, and he's going to speak about truancy. He's the truancy and his guiding question is, what should parents and guardians know about how districts will handle student engagement and truancy in school year 2020-21?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I sure do appreciate going first, but I see that David Cook is also on the agenda, and he's going to do NTI and participation. So my presentation may not make as much sense until after David's, but if you have questions, we're happy to help. So I'll try not to step on David's toes, but so basically my question presented is how should districts handle truancy? KDE has released a guidance document yesterday. That guidance document is available on our COVID website. So I'm just going to try to give you an introduction and some high level information. If we could go to the first slide, please. So this is kind of just a general disclaimer that, KDE, we acknowledge that courts around the state treat truancy differently. They have different thresholds for bringing actions. We acknowledge that there's just not one size fits all solution for truancy. And we also realize that different school districts have different attendance policies. But during these periods of sustained remote learning, we feel it's very important to try to engage all students and that we need as many students participating as possible. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? So this is where I'll try not to sort of step on David's toes. Due to the pandemic, districts need flexibility to deliver instruction using different models. And some of these models are not conducive to being able to take what we consider, regular attendance. For example, it's hard to take attendance when kids are learning remotely using paper packets. So to accommodate this needed flexibility through a combination of executive orders and regulations, traditional attendance will not be collected during the next school year. And just as traditional attendance won't be taken, we had to, funding has to be different too. So the funding is usually based on attendance, and for the next school year, it will use the same data, the attendance data that was used for Senate Bill 177 from the last legislative session, and that allowed a district to choose between using 1819 attendance data or 1920. Most districts went with 1819, a few, 14 or so did 1920. So that's how they'll be funded. But even though traditional attendance will not be taken and districts won't be funded on it, compulsory education remains in effect. So how do you make sure that kids are engaged during remote learning if you're not taking attendance? So in lieu of attendance, districts, schools will document participation. And participation rates will be reported to the Kentucky Department of Education and to the Legislative Research Commission, and that'll be done 3 times over this next year. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this slide just sort of lays out sort of the legal requirements and contains the definition of truancy. The first, KRS 159.010, that requires parents and guardians to send their children to school. And then the definition of truancy is any student who's been absent from school without a valid excuse for 3 or more days is considered truant. And if you are truant 2 times in a row, you can be considered a habitual truant. And then a local board may set its own policies around attendance. Can we go to the next slide, please? So how should districts approach truancy? So districts should collect and enter student participation information in Infinite Campus. Participation for in-person students will be just like in a normal year. You'll just, if they're in the seat, they will get attendance. Now, if they're learning remotely, it's going to be interactions with teachers, and David Cook will speak to this in a few minutes. But those interactions will be documented in IC, and that'll be the student's participation. So districts should approach truancy, if a student is not participating, just like now, if they're not in school, then they should be held to the same standards and considered truant. Districts should work with students and families to engage students and promote participation, encourage and facilitate communication and collaboration between teachers, DPPs, Frisky coordinators, and families. And one way that we thought as a way to help districts, we're encouraging districts to have office hours for teachers, where they could even use classified staff to help engage. How could even help use classified staff to engage students. And then, when issues with truancy become apparent, especially with students participating remotely, then the DPP is encouraged, just like now, to document the home conditions and intervention strategies attempted, and where appropriate, after consultation with court designated workers, to refer the case to the Family Accountability Intervention and Response Team, or the FAIR team. And we are encouraging districts to still conduct home visits because they're important, but they need to be conducted pursuant to district guidelines and with all safety precautions taken. So that's really all I have on my introduction. If there's any questions, I'm happy to try to help or answer right now. But that's all I have.
We have a couple questions in the chat box. How does this policy apply to students with disabilities, i.e. ADA for Part B? Will it impact state funding for our ECE populations?
So for the next school year, the funding is separated from attendance. So as we talked about the sort of the Senate Bill 177 concept, for the next school year, funding and attendance are decoupled. You will receive funding based on your student attendance data that you chose, the district chose, either the 18-19 or the 19-20. So that's your funding source. Now, and the participation is not, it's a gauge, it's in student engagement. It's not, your funding will not be based on participation, but it's a way to show that kids are engaged, and then that we have to be able to provide some proof that we're not losing kids or kids are falling behind.
The next question is, do ARC teams need to address participation, and that's in quotes, on IEPs? Participation for a student with disabilities may look different, require different types of interactions.
So absolutely, and I'm not a special ed expert, so I would encourage you to consult with the special ed part of KDE, and then
Matt.
OFO is happy to help. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in because I'll address this a little bit in my presentation, Judith. But I'll also tell you that every district, as a part of their NTI application for this fall, was required to answer. There's a specific question about how NTI is being incorporated into the ARCs as well as IEPs. So every district has a process by which they're supposed to be involving those structures in the process. Yes, I agree. There'll be some different participations, and you'll see that we specifically identify that in one of the participation options for remote learners. And I'll explain that in a little bit more detail when I'm up.
That's all the questions we have thus far.
Could I, is it okay if I go ahead and speak just a moment? It's Rhonda with Kentucky Spin. First, let me thank you all so much for putting together, and I was like a kid at Christmas when I saw the truancy guidance document, because this is so important. And I know Commissioner Brown, that this was something that I've talked about towards the end of last year, and then again going into this year, because where I'm seeing the huge breakdown is in the communication. And a kid may show up on a list and then have a truancy officer involved, and there maybe hasn't been that communication between the teachers and the parents or any of that. And one thing too, I guess the sentence that stands out most to me, and I think is the most helpful, again, because it all goes back to the communication, is encouraging and facilitating the communication between teachers and parents and families, friskies, everybody, because I'm seeing that there's a disconnect from higher up in the districts than on the ground. And everybody may think that families, and again, listen, we're all doing the best we can with this, so I'm not being critical, but there's a huge gap in the communication that in the end, regardless if it's a child with a disability or any child, that gap, we've got to close that, because the communication is so critical. So I guess thank you. And because we are talking with families throughout the state that this is an issue that's coming up, is truancy, and it's not a true truancy situation. And that's where my fear is for our families and children. Thank you.
All right, I think that's all we've got for you, Matt.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Commissioner Julian Tackett with the Kentucky High School Athletic Association.
All right, thank you all. And I was asked today to come on and just see if anyone had any questions or thoughts that needed to be processed for the future. We just recently released the last part of August a document called Healthy at Sports, which was married up with a lot of the provisions of Healthy at School and trying to get back some piece of normalcy, even if we're not going to be completely normal for quite a while. The document, it's a long link, but our website is actually pretty easy to navigate. If you go to khsa.org, and there's a menu bar that says COVID-19, and you can get to the Healthy at Sports documentation. What I'd like to do is kind of take you through just a little bit of the document, maybe some things that were covered in it. It is it's a pretty good sized document. So because we're dealing with 18 sports and sport activities among 280 schools, it is obviously there's no cookie cutter to make all of this work. So I just walk you through sections. I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I want to make sure that we can continue to get additional information out. We have had multiple conferences with our schools. We have had multiple sessions with media. The schools are doing a really good job of implementing things. As a lot of you know, we began being involved in mid-March with all of this and had to shut down anything related to athletic activities through the end of April, and then have had a gradual restart of that starting in June. So I know it's been a challenge, and but we also know that we've got a delicate balancing act here. There's studies already being released, as you all are more than aware, of the people that lost certain activities, whether it be athletics or band or other extracurriculars or co-curriculars. They lost those things, and it has really shaken the students' sense of normalcy. So we have really tried to help. So we got that, plus we're balancing the whole effects, all the effects of the pandemic and the safety issues, and we continue to get more data on that. We've worked hand in hand with Kevin and his staff at the department, as well as the state board, and certainly the Department of Public Health's been right there along with us as we've shared information. But this document really tells schools, the segment 3 document, or stage 3 document, tells our schools how to start having events again. And they're going to be limited. And we're already seeing variances around the state, and a lot of that is virus related. So it's probably, there's probably valid reasons why the data is different. Certain schools, for example, are allowing a couple tickets per parent or per student, and some are allowing, I think I saw in Fayette County where they're allowing 4 to 5 family members per student. And I think a lot of that is the recognition of the different types of families we have, as well as the school's ability to contain these activities. Our decision was made a while back. It was actually made in July to go ahead and offer those schools who chose to start early the opportunity to participate. That was not something that probably was universally received and may have made it more challenging in some areas. But we think those schools that are starting and have started earlier are benefiting from that. But our document just walks through a lot of initial things. First of all, much like the school day document, there is a requirement that everyone that enters a facility, whether it's practice or play, be screened for the symptoms, including a temperature check, which is still the universally accepted symptom to watch for as we go forward. There's protocol about what to do with positive cases, what to do with suspected cases. That is not anything unique or new. What we've tried to do is compile for the after-school crowd, the athletics group, compile a lot of suggestions from this group and that group into a guidance document that gives them an ability to play. One of the things that did come up quite a bit in discussion and developing guidance was whether or not to put a testing protocol in there. And it's really easy for us to watch the news in the evening or read a newspaper in print or online and see what the Southeastern Conference is doing or the Atlantic Coast Conference is doing, which we have a member in each of those conferences in our state, and just simply say we're going to copy that. But I've continually had to remind people that even the original CDC guidance and all of the healthy at work guidance and healthy at school guidance talks about you can only do what's reasonable, practical, and feasible for your community. And to put a statewide mandate in there, it doesn't meet either one of those three. So I think that's why it's been left to districts. We know there's a couple of districts that have adopted testing requirements for COVID testing. It's challenging because each local level needs to make their own decisions. And one of the things that I have said publicly is it's very tough to advocate for local control and only want local control on easy decisions. There's some challenging ones that have come up with this pandemic that we certainly were not any of us thought we would be planning on. We've gone into facility cleaning, and that's not new. We tried to compile that. Certainly there should be routine cleaning of all the implements being used by the players if they're shared and the equipment that's being used. Now, we've had some people go a little far. Just since the start of competition this week, we've got reports of game officials, which most people know as referees, telling people that when a substitute came off the bench, they've got to sterilize the bench. And if their local health department tells them to do that, that's fine. But that certainly is excessive in terms of the guidance, particularly if you don't have a documented spread. We recommend, just like all the other guidance, that schools give long and hard thought about whether or not they want to try to use locker rooms for extracurricular activities. One of the challenges, of course, is you already have the burden of cleaning during the regular day, and now you're going to take that on afterwards. So most people, we're hearing, most people are not trying to do locker rooms. They're really trying to accept the fact that it's not business as usual. This is different, and they're trying to keep safety as the first aspect. The next section of our document, and I think it's probably critical to this, is that we tried to divide up our seasons when we got started. You know, the typical school interscholastic season is a little over 3 months. So it's in, out, and done. But we thought it would be better to divide those into segments and let the first segment be smaller. Let the first segment be fewer people in attendance. Let the first segment be less complications. Let our schools figure out what they can and can't do. Because while a lot of the general public may think that you can come right in and do a football game at a stadium, and so they think of everything that a stadium has. Oh, they forget that their cross country course might be off campus. Their golf course is almost certainly off campus. Their soccer field may or may not be the same as their football field. And then you've got the complications created by volleyball. So you have being an indoor sport and some of the worries about indoor sport. So you have a lot of different things. And that's why it was important that we try to calculate some things. We did lower some game limits. We were very fearful that by starting later to where we could see what the virus was doing in late summer, that we had individuals who would have tried to play the full number of games in a much shorter time frame and really distracted from the academic learning and the curricular end of school. And we want athletics and activities to continue to be an addition to school, not replacement for school. We can't forget, though, that there's probably people on this call who can identify with the fact that there's a number of students whose attendance is better because they play sports. Their grades are better because they play sports. Their deportment, and I use that because I'm talking to parental age people, their deportment is better. We'll call it conduct. But certainly they know they've got to meet a standard. So we're glad that is a continued emphasis and benefit from trying to play. Attendance was not set out on a statewide basis. Each of you can probably point to facilities in your area. You could probably think of 5 soccer fields or 5 football fields and think how different they all are. There are some with multiple entrances. There are some that have ingress and egress easy to manage. There are some that have one way in, one way out. Now, if I'm going to socially distance, it's going to be very difficult for me to put the same number of people in that field as it is the one with multiple entrances and shiny new bleachers. So that is definitely a local control issue. One of the things that we've heard about this week, and districts have to make very tough decisions, but just on the football and outdoor fall sports side, schools have to also decide who they consider essential. And everyone involved in extracurricular activities is valuable, but who is essential to the playing of a game? And we've had that issue come up with respect to cheerleaders, with respect to dance teams. They're all very valuable, and it's a great experience for them. But in this case, especially in these early stages, it's really important to schools to find who is essential as they go forward, so they can continue to try and mitigate not only the spread of the virus, but work their way through some of these criteria. We didn't define those criteria. Those came from a group that some of you may not have heard of. It's called the National Federation of High Schools, and that's the 50 state associations plus the District of Columbia. And it's all the people that sponsor extracurricular sports and activities. So their sports medicine committee really refined who we were trying to classify as essential. And one of the things they learned from last spring is, if at all possible, if this virus will let us do it, we don't want another group of students who have given so much effort to playing the sport and practicing the sport to lose their opportunity for competition. So what can we do to mitigate that? And part of that mitigation was letting people decide who's essential and who's not. We look at most press facilities, they normally call them press boxes, at a football stadium, and you might have a radio crew there that's local broadcast, been doing these games for years. But coming in with that crew is also a spouse of one of the announcers and maybe a kid and a friend, and we got to kind of separate people for this year. I have said all along, and I know Mr. Brown has heard me say this far too often, we are sincerely hoping that 2021-22 looks a lot like 2018-19. But 2020-21 is not going to look like anything we've ever seen or hope to see again. But if we can keep that opportunity there, we think it's worth some of the sacrifices. And then, of course, we had to address the issue of masks and face coverings and continue to. It is for some reason, it has become a very polarizing issue. And I would point out that even our governor, who's a staunch advocate of masks, has said in his press briefings before that there's a difference in having to wear a mask 7 hours in a closed area and having to wear it an hour and a half at a sport contest, or so they recognize there's some differences. However, in light of the recent request that everybody mask up, we did the same thing. We have had that in our guidance. We expect everybody but the aerobically exerting players, those people who every sports medicine and medical authority recognizes they should be medically waivered. We believe everybody else should be in a mask. We know there's other medical waivers. Those are important to recognize as well. But until we get through this, and it appears as though that those three basic steps, the hand washing, hygiene, certainly the mask and social distancing, appear to be our best mitigation steps. And I take you back again to the CDC things, because I've been asked this question a couple of times recently. Why are people even playing if you can't socially distance? Well, again, what is practical, feasible, reasonable, what is the best for your community is we probably should do more to make sure we've at least tried. We get a lot of press about football and a lot of press about whether or not football should be playing because, they're down there on each other. But carefully watch a couple of the high school games this coming weekend that ESPN will run, or they run the last couple of weeks. And you see that the intense person against person really doesn't occur very much in games. And that's a challenge to our coaches, is we can't let it over occur in practice either. We've got to try to hit and get out, hit and get out. And I know we've got coming on staff at the department, we got somebody that's been experienced in coaching and certainly understands that difference. The challenge will be on our people every day in practice, a whole lot less than games. So this document, while it's long, and on the first part of the document, we've broken it down into pieces, and that website shows all four pieces that you have. You've got things for the general. And then there is a section of guidance documents for the various sports, because even within the sports, some of the rules have been modified this year. Some of those rules have been modified to help with social distancing. For example, benches on the sideline of a volleyball match, and you're going to see this in basketball as well, are normally restricted in terms of length. So what we've done is allow them to expand those, as well as encourage them not to seat people in the stands behind the benches, so that the players or the non-players could, perhaps maybe your managers and trainers, go back on that first row. So you keep your social distancing. They can still go do their job as they need to, but really promote social distancing. And that's just an example. Every sport has those. So with that, I'll just leave that in summary. And again, our website, khsa.org. We are the state's official designee from the State Board of Education to do the athletics piece. I've offered to Kevin, I'll say this in jest, I've offered to Kevin multiple times this spring if he'd like to take it over. Give me a call, and the phone has not rung. Obviously, sports can be a lightning rod if allowed. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had a Facebook group developed that now has 38,000 people in it, who are really pushing as parents and as involved people to make sure sports get an opportunity. We don't know what the future will hold any more than anyone on this call does, but we think we've taken some very good mitigation steps, and hopefully going forward, we'll get to keep playing. And with that, I'll turn it over to the host and see. I don't want to take up any of your extra time, but see if there are questions you'd like answered or anything else you'd like covered.
We've got a comment and a question in the chat box. They kind of go together. She says, you mentioned cheer and dance, and if they are essential. I know in Fayette County, both dance and cheer are competition teams that require contact just like other sports, and yet they are not able to be in contact like football. I guess my question is, what makes the contact of cheer and dance different than the contact of football or soccer? Can the ball used in these fall sports carry any risk for virus vector?
Okay, let me treat that as two questions, if that makes sense, because the second one is a science question that, according to everything we've been told, there is minimal, and that's why they talk about the cleaning of those balls as often as possible, as often as feasible. In other words, in volleyball, you certainly could not clean a ball every time someone touched it, but you could clean it after each rally. The same thing with soccer. There are natural stoppages in the game that allow you. And that's what the experts have said, and that's what every state is doing. And that's why the mitigation strategy has been to clean as often as practical and feasible. Early on, when we resumed workouts in early June, there were questions about whether even touching was going to be a problem, and there wasn't even allowed, if you recall, to be passing of a ball. But as we've learned more about the disease, and particularly the respiratory emphasis, it's let everybody focus issues. And that is the ultimate answer to the first question. Number one, cheer and dance are not fall activities. They may be done in the fall and early work may be done in the fall, but they are winter activities instead in terms of the fall, winter, spring. So consideration of when the competitive cheer squads start and the competitive dance squads has been put in with the winter sports. It's actually going to be discussed at our board meeting on the 16th of September on what a good timeline would look like. Now, most of the events in the fall have already been postponed, including some that are not ours, but including some regional qualifiers for national competition. Those have all been pushed back because everybody is looking to see how some of the fall sports do to see if additional mitigation is necessary. Secondly, early on, all the sports medicine authorities talked about competitive cheer. There is much more continual face contact and spraying. And here's the other piece that is so unique about cheer in particular is you are part of your competition of being judged is how well you project. So when you project and you've got a respiratory potential virus, that's led a lot of people to do a lot of research. We're involved with our National Federation on some research of respiratory particles, and that's why it was necessary to have a little delay. Now, step back one last piece. Obviously, there are cheer and potentially dance people involved at regular sport contests, but that is what's called sideline. That's not what's called competition. And there's no stunting, building on top of each other, partner things, et cetera, is supposed to be done in those where you might have the face-to-face respiratory exchange of droplets. So that's a local school decision, not a KHSA decision on whether or not they allow people on the sideline. So there's first of all, there's an important distinction between sideline cheer and the competition cheer and competition dance squads. And then secondly, you have the respiratory piece. But I think just like I saw an article yesterday that there's now been 1,000 football games played in high school in our country and not one breakout regarding or outbreak regarding the coronavirus being spread by that. We're going to continue to learn. We've already moved our cheer and dance competitions to after the first of the year. So squads will have plenty of time to prepare. And the last piece that certainly is a concerning point, I'm glad that comprehensive question was asked, because the last thing is this is also indoors. And that has been a particular challenge to people studying the virus. I know that the staff at KDE can tell you there are more questions each week about ventilation in indoor facilities. And they're trying to learn more and balance the whole security aspect of keeping the buildings locked while you're balancing the need to exhaust fumes in case you have particular respiratory droplets that are problems. I think that it's going to prove to be a very wise move to delay cheer and dance a little bit as far as the competition side, and let's get some more data to where we can make sure we've got all the mitigation steps in place.
That's all the questions that are in the chat box for you. So,
well, thank you all. And if you don't mind, I'll adjourn to another meeting that starts in about 4 minutes. But I certainly thank you for the opportunity and appreciate your all's contribution as parents to helping with the whole educational setting, not just the extracurricular or the curricular piece. And thanks again. If we can ever do anything, reach out to us.
Thank you, Commissioner Tackett, for your time today.
Thank you.
Our next speaker will be David Cook, and he's going to speak on reopening guidance for daily participation and NTI.
Thank you, Leslie. And thank you, everyone. It's good to be with you all. I'm trying to think back to all the number of times I've spoken to you all over the years, but even earlier in this year, I think as well. And as Matt pointed out, some of what I have to say, he's already covered. I'll try to remember which parts he didn't cover, and we'll make sure we highlight the things that are most important that are in this guidance document. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. So this guidance was released earlier this summer, and it's specifically about what Matt was describing, the fact that we're shifting for the year coming in that we're coming into a daily participation mode for the measurement of students' engagement in school, and also wanted to just reiterate the conversation about non-traditional instruction, since many of you are involved with students in districts that are actively participating in NTI right now. So our guiding question for this section is, how can this guidance support parents in understanding the shift from attendance to daily participation? And Matt went over most of this already. Just to reiterate a couple of things. You're still going to be, in essence, collecting attendance for those students who are in person in attendance. It will translate in the Infinite Campus system into participation. So you will record for a student that is an in-person student their presence in the classroom, which will be their participation. Since we're not going to be reporting attendance in any way for the 2021 school year, participation will be the norm for all students. And one of the other things that I think is, oops, let me go back. Oh, sorry. There we go. And it's important to remember that, because compulsory attendance is still a requirement, even though we won't be reporting it out through that normal method of average daily attendance. You'll still be expected to, particularly for those students who are in person, to record that they are present in the classroom. Daily participation is, and Matt mentioned this as well, is a measurement of the interactions between a teacher and the student. It is not a measure of quality of student work. It's primarily a measure to see if the student is actually participating, doing work, not what that work looks like in the end. That's what grading is for. There was some questions back in the spring about participation being a measure of whether or not a student completed the assignments with high quality. And that's not, it's again, it goes back to the same thing attendance does. It's to measure that the student is participating. It's not to measure how what that level of participation is. It's just to measure their participation, their engagement, if you will, in the instructional process. The regulation that was passed earlier this year, emergency regulation, defines non-traditional instruction, means remote instruction, which the student is learning in a location other than the traditional classroom using digital or other alternative methods for learning. So in other words, NTI, non-traditional instruction, is an umbrella term. Sometimes we want to use it to identify a day in the calendar, which it also can be used that way, but it's to talk about any learning that's occurring in a non-traditional way. So it could be your virtual kids, it could be kids who are doing paper-based work. It's a much more umbrella term than just a day in the calendar, which is what I think we've tended to look at it as particularly before the pandemic when NTI was primarily a program used for snow days and other days like that. So we mentioned already that students who are in person, their daily participation is their attendance, their measurement of being there in face-to-face. You can see them. I think one thing I will point out about kids who are in person that you may or may not be aware of is in the traditional way that we record attendance. Attendance is an exception process. In other words, you only count a student who is absent. If they're present, you don't mark anything down in the book. You only mark it down if they're not there. With participation, it's flipped the other way around because of the way that we have to record it in IC, particularly for those remote learners. So in this coming school year, teachers will be recording that the student is there in person, not that they're not there. So the report will then pull those kids who aren't there, but you'll be actually recording it for their actual attendance, not their absence. This is what I was talking about earlier when the question was asked by Judith about the daily participation for kids who are in remote learning. We identified in the emergency regulation 4 ways. Any one of these ways would count towards a student's daily participation. The first and second one, or the first one in particular was what I was referring to, which is one-on-one communication between, and that one-on-one communication can be a video chat through a video platform, video conferencing platform like Zoom or Google Meets, between a teacher and a student, or a teacher and a parent with smaller children, or with a situation where the parent through the IEP is part of the communication strategy for that student with disability. So the first way that, and remember, it's one of these 4 ways, so it doesn't have to be all of them. It's basically you're looking at those interactions, one of these 4. The second one is a group conversation or phone call between a teacher and a subgroup of a class or an entire class. The third is in most of our districts now, districts are using learning management systems, and the teacher obviously can measure and record and look at a student's time logged into the learning management system, and they can see their assignments being completed. So that's another way. And then finally, as Matt mentioned, we have the paper-based situation where kids are turning in packets of instructional materials that have been sent out to them for those kids, particularly that don't have digital access. And that would be another way of measuring participation. It's important to recognize from your all's perspective, we are requiring that daily participation be recorded, but we are not requiring that it be recorded daily. I know that sounds like a confusing statement, but what I mean is, because we know that kids are doing weekly packets or teachers are doing project-based learning in a lot of cases where they may have created a project for an entire week for their students that are digital as well as paper-based, that we know that it may not be possible for the teacher to physically record attendance or participation every day, but they could come in at the end of a week and record those 5 days at the end of the week based on what they see either in that paper packet submission or what's on the LMS or other methods. So you need to be aware that somebody's not going to have to be sitting there every single day based on how the district has decided to and how the teacher has decided to present those lessons. As Matt pointed out, we will be reporting publicly to the Department of Education, the State Board of Education, and the legislature 3 times during the coming school year. The report of daily participation, and that report will be at the district level. Individual districts and schools will be able to run reports on what's going on in their schools, but the reporting publicly will be at the district level. So the whole district's participation rate for the time leading up to that report. That will happen in October, it will happen in January, and it will happen in July. So that's the schedule for those reports, and that will be what will be probably reported on and all of those things. So you'll see your district, and you'll see your district against other districts. That is all that I have in terms of presentation. I see a question. Judith.
Do you see that question, David?
I do. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Meg. Right. And that kind of, a little bit of that goes back to Matt's presentation. I think teachers and administrators will be monitoring participation in the same way that they would have monitored attendance. And it will be the expectation, just like it would be in a more traditional school year, that there is a plan and a process, each district having a process for what they do when they notice that a student is not participating, and how they will, what methods. So just in a year when the DPP, the Director of Pupil Personnel, and other pupil personnel staff would have had activities that they do when they notice a student is truant, they would be doing the same things this year, but in a participation way. There would be calls made. There would be, I don't think you change your process at all simply because the student may be in a remote learning situation. You're simply shifting the duties of that pupil personnel staff to be looking at those students that are both in person and could also be in a remote learning situation. And I think, just as Matt was kind of pointing out, I think you're going to have district by district, their policies have always been in place about truancy. And I think a similar, you could almost say a similar process would exist for truancy now. A student who's not participating is truant. Could also be truant now based on the fact that they're not participating. And I see Judith's additional question. I think that that's part of what we're trying to do. My team, just so you'll be informed, my team has established a website for support services for staff and teachers in districts to which includes an opportunity for those folks to share with us their areas where they need help. So we at the department and through the Division of Innovation are specifically going to be looking at and sharing out and talking about those kinds of requests that are coming in from teachers and administrators. We have shared a lot of resource through our web pages and through the reopening guidance about how the redeployment of some of these staffs, like the pupil personnel staff that I mentioned, how does their job look different than it does in a normal year? How does the job of Family Resource Center staff look different as you think about how you need to support people in the schools to better engage students? So I think it's on all of us to really focus in on how do we rethink the kinds of services that we provide to students and to teachers and to families during this situation, which is very different. And especially since we will have situations where districts are doing hybrid models, where they're doing in-person, NTI, all those kinds of things, and we're not sure what the future holds. So it's important that everybody not remember that it might be necessary for all of our staffs, particularly those staffs that deal with student services, are cognizant of what they might need to do differently with their resources, both physical resources and human resources during this time. Thank you, Judith. I appreciate your questions.
If I could ask it first, I want to thank you for even before school started, you were open to, some of the concerns and things that we were seeing for families, and really talking with the superintendent, you and Damien and everyone. So first, a thank you, and it's greatly appreciated. And the guidance that's come out, I actually have, I guess, two questions. So the first, just in regards to this, where it has to do with the daily participation, because I noted when I was looking through that it is based on like Infinite Campus, but many of the districts, they may be, I'll just give you my sons, for example, they're using the Google Classroom. So are they pulling the data from all the various programs so that they are seeing that the kids are doing it, because it might not feed over if you're over here in Google Classrooms to Infinite Campus. So I don't want the kids getting dinged that are working on it and actually accessing it, even if they're struggling. You know what I mean?
I understand. And just so let me give you the kind of visual, if I can. I don't have a visual, but you can close your eyes and picture what I'm talking about.
Yes,
so think of Infinite Campus as the recording place. So I'm teacher A in your son's or daughter's classroom, and I use Google Classroom as my learning management system. So what's going to happen is it all falls on the teacher. So it's not a matter of Infinite Campus having to sort of identify it on its own. The teacher is recording the daily participation based on what they see. And that could be in Google Classroom. It could be in any other of a bunch of different learning management systems that might be used. But all of this falls just like it would in the grade book with attendance in future years. But it really is a matter of the teacher looking at the Google Classroom work and then saying, yes, David participated today because I see it. It's not Infinite Campus having to somehow know what might be out there. I will tell you this, that in just the last month or so, Infinite Campus has, as part of its functionality, specifically for Google Classroom, has a connection point. So that data that's in Google Classroom can be uploaded by the teacher into a place in Infinite Campus in their gradebook. So they, at least with Google Classroom, it may not be true with some of the other platforms, but we do now have that specific connection point for teachers to be able to see the data that's in Google Classroom and put it and more easily have it represented in Infinite Campus.
Okay, thank you. There was just one other thing, if I could,
sure.
And again, they may not be directly, it has to do with the non-traditional instruction and some of the things that are coming up, and especially where children with disabilities are concerned. But is that making sure, and again, everything goes back to communication and the success of communication and partnering, whether you're a parent or the school. But here's the concern too, is when this rolls out and when we go back to an adjusted in-person or not, making sure that it is not just very clear, that everyone understands that if a parent, depending upon the choices the district offers, right? Every parent, regardless if they're a parent of a child with a disability or not, they have the option to choose what they fit best. And making sure, though, too, whatever they choose, if it might be strictly the virtual, that does not alleviate any responsibility that the child still be educated, not just effectively, but we want them to succeed. And then again, on top of that, is for them to that there still isn't, all the responsibility doesn't fall on the parent to deliver that. And especially for children with disabilities with IEPs and 504 plans, that still does not alleviate the responsibility of the school. Yes, given the situation, but and it's also one of the great things that I love about how KDE is done, no matter what, regardless of the guidance that's been issued, has been very specific for special populations and things to consider. But this is going to be a huge issue. I'm already seeing that right now they're not getting maybe what they should. But then on top of that, I don't want it to turn into, well, you chose this. And again, I'm not trying to be negative, but there are these different scenarios that are rolling out for all of our families. And I guess not just to give you the issue, but how we can help with it, because we're here to help and to help make things not only better for our children, but our teachers and everybody. But that's a huge concern.
And I appreciate that concern very much. And I'll also allow Dr. Glass and Kevin, Mr. Brown, to also, if they have any comments about this. I would just say thank you, first of all, because you do recognize we've done a really deep dive and worked really hard on guidance for particularly special populations, as you said. And so we're recognizing and know that there's an incredibly important need to be cognizant that we aren't alleviated, particularly from the requirements for educating students with special needs, but students in general. One of the things we found out during the spring and as we flow into the fall is that there's a lot of best practices about non-traditional instruction that we need folks to be cognizant of. And one of the biggest ones of those is this whole notion of balance as it pertains to how students are learning in remote situations, because it is different. And we know that it's different, and in many cases, it's probably not as strong as in-person instruction is. But we know that, for instance, that students can't sit in front of a computer screen for 7 hours a day in total, and continuously, as opposed to the fact that they may sit at school in that way, but they have a lot of different things changing in their day. So what we've determined and found in a lot of the research that we've been doing among our districts is the best way to do remote learning is in a balanced way. And we talk about words that are, the two words we talk about are synchronous and asynchronous learning. So when you're dealing with a remote learner, it's really important that you give them a lot of breaks. It's really important that you have a combination of synchronous learning where the teacher is face-to-face with the kids on the computer or is recorded and the student watches a video. That's asynchronous. So in other words, it's not real-time stuff. But there needs to be this combination of the teacher directly instructing like they would in the classroom and opportunities for students to have self-directed learning times. And that's not just because the student needs those varieties, but obviously we have a lot of families who have varying schedules. So it's not possible for a lot of people with NTI to be doing it exactly when the school day would happen. So that sort of those sort of best practices, we're finding that if somebody does all synchronous where the kids are sitting in front of a computer all day, that doesn't work well, even if there's a teacher interaction. And we're also learning that if a student is being asked to do all of their work on their own, that doesn't work well. So it's that balance, that continual thinking through how the learning is designed so that you get at all of the aspects of remote learning that need to be addressed. So I hope I spoke to that a little bit, but yes, we are always cognizant, and we are every day adding resources to our support pages around those kinds of topics.
David, I wanted to make sure you saw the comments regarding the AmeriCorps members in schools across the state.
Hey, David, could I just chime in there for a second?
Yeah, go ahead, Matt. I saw you had put something.
You know, we had talked about districts, some districts looking for opportunities to give classified staff some ability to do some of this. So that's something we laid out in our guidance, that if districts need some duties for some classified staff, we're encouraging them to help support teachers in their outreach to document participation. So I think the AmeriCorps is a great idea, but also districts should keep in mind that they can utilize some of their classified staff to help document student participation and thereby support their teachers and sort of lighten some of that burden.
That's exactly right, Matt. And that's one of the things, most of y'all have been familiar with a huge movement that started in this country during the pandemic around pods and those kinds of services that are provided there. And we took that and looked at it and said, what could we do with existing staffs and existing services in our districts by pushing them out and not having them so much happen at the buildings? And that's exactly what Matt's talking about, is we need to look at every person that we have on staff, particularly classified staff, and what they are doing on those NTI days, and how could we, and the AmeriCorps is another example, how could we better utilize all of the people that are in our districts? Shasta, you had a comment in the box as well. That's what I'm talking about, is it's important that students have, and you'll hear a lot of districts using this phrase during the pandemic, called choice boards. So there has to be a multitude of ways in which students can demonstrate their participation. It can't be, we've also found in speaking about best practices, that the notion of daily assignments, as in Monday your assignment is this, Tuesday your assignment is this, do not work as well, as I mentioned, project-based learning, where a student is being asked to do something across a week, or interdisciplinary learning, where their two teachers get together and work on an assignment for kids. But it's important that if there's a synchronous requirement, that there are other ways for that student to participate. So hopefully that teacher is recording those meetings, those virtual type meetings, so that the student can watch it at another time. That's a great example. The other thing that's important to note is participation is a daily requirement. In a middle school or high school situation, what that means is every teacher is recording participation, but as long as that student has a participation, what we call mark, on a particular day, they have been counted in participation. So it could be that on day one, a particular assignment wasn't completed by a student in a particular class, but they had 4 other classes where the teacher did record them as being participating. So that student counts as having been participating. And there simply is the rule that we have a mark every day. So it's not about, I know the question sometimes comes up, is it 4 marks out of 7 or 5 out of 7? It's simply that they, and Judith, I think that most every one of these questions is a district decision. That's about how, and we're not suggesting that anybody go out that shouldn't go out. I'm just saying that we did a lot of great work. One of the parts of our spring work was to feed our students, and that was a way that a lot of classified staff were utilized, is to get those meals out to people, and they still may be getting those meals out to people. But if there are ways to deliver other kinds of resources to kids that might need specific things, that we could work that out. If there are ways that you could create other options in parts of a community that needs additional support by having staff available in healthy and safe conditions. Those are things we want. What we want districts to do is think about those things and provide supports where they're needed, and know that all those things are okay as you guys advocate for kids. So. The last question I see from Lisa is that's not actually in the regulation, but it has been shared with DPPs and attendance staffs in districts that, and it's really, it's the issue is that's the way the report was designed in Infinite Campus. So it's not anything anybody's going to manipulate in the district, as long as teachers just do their job and everybody puts in whatever the participation is, the system is automatically going to generate the report and it will just go back and look. It's not going to know what each teacher did individually. It's going to look and say that Lisa has participation on day one. Anything else?
Thank you, David.
Absolutely.
Thank you, David. I guess we'll hand it over to Interim Commissioner Kevin Brown.
Thank you. Why don't we just open it up? We have some time. Dr. Glass and I have to be off on another call at 12:30, but want to take any questions, concerns, feedback you have. That's why the advisory is here. So, and also if you have additional thoughts on any of the topics presented today that you just are now thinking of, we can, just because we're off that topic now, we can still have that discussion. So you feel free to make any comments in the chat or unmute and speak up.
Well, you know how I am, so I guess would you expect anything less, right? Any opportunity that we can hand out, and I know all of you all in all the different areas of KD has been working hard on this, and Greta and her whole team, any way that any guidance could be put out that states, again, sometimes just reminding that things didn't change just because we're in a pandemic on a variety of topics, but then also the guiding questions, the format that you all have used and taken into consideration. Any opportunity for, I don't think there could be too much guidance because any of that, and again, Kentucky and KD has went above and beyond. I don't know of any school district in another state or state departments who have done like this and offered guidance on such a variety of topics. So I am extremely grateful, but any opportunity, especially as we roll in to the different parts of how we look at it with all of our special populations too, taken into account of this is what this should look like, but on an altered. Am I making sense? Anywhere we can ensure that we are trying to build on that communication and make it stronger, but also too, so that none of our kids fall through the cracks and that everybody understands no matter what means that education is provided, they still have the right and access to the same level of education. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we are continuing, as we've said from the beginning, all those guidance documents are working, living documents. They will be edited as we continue to go on through this school year as necessary and revised. In addition, with sharing out with the various role groups through the calls that we have at the department, at the superintendent level, the advisory level, but then also role-alike groups within the department. That doesn't mean that we have actually covered everything. I think we will continue to find some places that maybe we had blind spots. But an example, though, of a message we've been sending from day one regarding exceptional children is we've been asking districts since the spring that, there are going to be compensatory education needs. And We always want to avoid compensatory education, and we see that as a negative, of course, if we get in that situation. But we're asking districts to embrace it, that there will need to be some very frank conversations with parents, and I know that has happened. And so we're asking districts, I think, to kind of meet in the middle. We're asking parents to meet in the middle about those discussions and what that looks like, because we're in a very unprecedented situation. But your comment is a good one, and I just ask everyone on the call from KDE to heed that recommendation, to continue honing that advice, and where we're seeing some weak spots, continue to give feedback to districts. I will tell you, though, I think there is a lot of guidance fatigue right now out there, just because there is so much of it and there's just so little time. And I know folks in the districts are exhausted just like everyone else, but I know everyone's trying to act in good faith to make sure we're doing our best. And as I've heard David say, NTI is much better now than it was back on March the 16th. That doesn't mean it's where it needs to be, and we continue to learn, but I feel much more comfortable about it. Dr. Glass, do you have any words to share in that regard, and maybe how you see the year playing out with these issues?
I'm sorry, Kevin. I had to step off for just a few moments, so I'll need to get caught up. My apologies, everybody.
No problem. We were just having a discussion, a very good comment by Ms. Logston about encouraging the department to continue to hone guidance, continue to look for weak spots, blind spots that we may be having, and pointing out to districts, reinforcing to districts that just because we're in COVID, and while there's some technical waivers out there for various things, we're not waiving a child's right to a free appropriate education, and everything else is still in effect. So and I was just having a discussion about how that is always how we've seen the guidance, that it will continue to evolve and live, and we have an obligation to continue having the discussions with districts about those items and pointing out those things, even though we recognize there's a lot of fatigue out there.
I think that's exactly right, and we know that school districts have got a lot of catching up to do on compensatory services after the disruption that happened this spring and is happening even now. So we'll get there, and eventually we will get caught up, but it will take some time, and we'll need that sort of combination of pressure and grace over the next few months as we get through this.
That's exact, and Dr. Glass, that's exactly, you said it better than I said it, but that's exactly the message that Greta Hilton and others have been sending since spring about compensatory education is kind of seen as a negative, and we obviously don't want to have that. We don't want that situation, but we know it has occurred. There are situations just due to no fault of anyone other than the virus. There are certain services we couldn't provide at the level without being in person, and that districts need to embrace that and start having those conversations with parents.
Hi, this is Judith Bradley, Commissioner Brown, thank you, and Commissioner to be, I guess, Glass, thank you both. I also appreciate the dialogue, the two-way dialogue and the conversation. On that note, I wonder if, because I'm actually experiencing this with a couple of families, whether districts have a sense of permission, if you will, to hopefully to avoid the need for compensatory education by continuing some services maybe in the home or in a pod type environment, whether that's a small group of children, students coming to the classroom, specifically when we're talking about the occupational and speech therapists. Those are some of the services I hear most often that families really are in need of. There's no way to provide that. A parent cannot provide those very specialized services, nor should they. That's one issue. And although I understand the guidance fatigue, I'm still requesting nonetheless some further clarification regarding that, but also another situation that's come up a couple of times with students and families who are on home instruction for medical and other reasons. These are special ed students who have been receiving only 2 hours a week of instruction, and some clarification that that they still, and maybe I have a misunderstanding, but that they still can and ought to be instructed per their IEPs. And this may be too specialized a conversation for here. I appreciate that if we need to take it offline, that's fine. But just those 2 points that I think for our families of special needs students, and I'm sorry to dominate about that topic. Those of you who know me know that that is in particular my passion. That it's difficult for everyone, and families I speak to understand, and they are really trying hard to also be patient. But some of the districts seem to not be as clear as maybe they might be on what is and is not okay in terms of therapies in particular.
Well, I can speak to this just briefly from the experience of being in Jefferson County, Colorado, where we were navigating this very issue. And I would expect that districts in Kentucky are navigating it much the same way. And that is that if there are any services that can be delivered individually or remotely, anything that can be delivered is being delivered, because you don't want to get so behind on these compensatory services that it takes you an extraordinary amount of time to dig out of them. But there are some things that cannot, or it's not safe to. So I think each district is having to think through what can they deliver remotely, what can they deliver on sending someone out to a home, and if protective equipment and procedures can be put in place where services can be safely delivered, then doing that, and really working toward it's the exception and not the rule that we're piling up a need for compensatory services.
Dr. Glass, I'll just add, Dr. Kelly Foster is not able to be on the call today, and she's sort of our guidance guru. But just this last week, we released guidance, or we released it earlier and we updated it this week on small group meetings at schools. And one of the very clear uses of that small group opportunity at the schools in a healthy schools environment is for what Judith was just talking about, which is having students come in possibly for therapy sessions, or where there's just a couple of them coming in at a time. And that's another great way to utilize staff in the buildings if it's not safe to be out in the community. So I just wanted us to Judith's point, there is a guidance document specifically about the use of small group efforts inside schools to help with those kinds of issues where they're not necessarily instructional issues, they are for services. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Any other issues? All right. I want to thank everyone for your time. I know many of you had to take time away from your work and other family obligations to be with us. This is very beneficial. As you know, this information, the meeting, of course, is recorded, but also the information in the chat, the form the exit slip, please fill out the exit slip. We do utilize that information. Sometimes you have things that maybe you don't want to mention in front of the whole group. Or maybe you're just now thinking of it, or after the meeting is over, please fill out those exit slips. That helps us also add to the meeting and gives the great guidance and feedback to the department. Dr. Glass, any parting words for the parent advisory?
Well, I appreciate the chance to listen in on some parts of this and hear perspectives on things. And I think that getting that guidance to the department and out to schools on parents' perspectives and what families need and what kids need is really important. I look forward to working with all of you going forward to make sure that those voices are heard and they have an impact on how we deliver education in the Commonwealth. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the afternoon and the rest of the week. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good one.
Thank